Hello, this is Brett Spielbauer, and I am recording my first ever episode of my podcast for my Psych 532 course. This is all about the psychological effects of the internet, and today I'm just going to get started talking about Unit 1 and all the different assignments and tasks that we had to do. So, starting off right away, we step into the course syllabus where we see a lot of pretty typical stuff where we see what we're going to learn, some of the impacts of this class, a little bit about the professors and the different TAs. But then there's some special information too that goes along with this syllabus because we could see that there's a lot of talk about how there are no exams, no books that we need to buy, which is really great as a student just to see sort of more open, kind of free, unlimited access like that is a super big deal and something that is kind of easy to forget about. But then diving into more of the syllabus, we see talk of grade points, due dates, grading practices, and then the different kind of unit structures of the course. And I knew that this was going to be important because I could see that they were very well defined, like how they talk about welcoming to the internet, and then Unit 2 is about learning via the internet, and Unit 3 is about educating, and so on and so forth. Everything is very scripted and laid out, which is cool to see as someone who's going to be participating in the class. But then following that, for today, we also had to take a look at the course contract. And this contract, it's just a bunch of text to be copy and pasted into a document that's going to be emailed to the professor. But basically, it's an agreement that we're going to be understanding the assignments and like submitting them on time, and then being aware that our grading is being done in a certain way, understanding how the point system works, and just reflecting that we followed the syllabus, we looked at everything, and that we know what's going on. And then at the end, I just finish it off with a signature to show that I had read everything and understood the work. Once I was done with that contract, I made sure to email it off to the professor, and then I just made sure to use the appropriate header too about Sci 532 with the course contract. After I emailed the professor, I got a response email where she informed me how to complete the second half of the first assignment. I made sure to go to the gradebook and make a comment where I copy and pasted a following set of prompts, and I filled in the answers that all just talked about how to check points in the course, how to check your grades, how to correct assignments importantly, and then the importance of reading emails and just a bunch of things like that, like different course kind of content related bits and procedural things that were important to understand as this course goes on, and just making sure that you know how to keep your grades where you want them and what to do in case things start to change. But after that, I was done with the first assignment of the class. So that was Unit 1, Assignment 1 done. And I was looking forward to the rest of this class because I could tell that I kind of liked how it was formatted with everything being very procedural and step-based. But I was excited to keep moving. Starting off with Unit 1, Assignment 2, I took another look at the course syllabus and I read all about the flexibility accommodation and how this course was based on the principle of universal design, or in other words, kind of giving students leeway before they sort of ran into issues rather than trying to respond to emails and whatnot afterwards. And I learned all about the 1 week kind of catch up period that this course allowed. So basically, you might have an assignment that's due on the 10th, but that's only like the listed due date. It's not officially due technically until the 17th. And this catch up period existed so that students could kind of have a chance to work around due dates and have different ways of like fitting things into their difficult schedules, which was super cool to see. I think any courses that do this, so that was very impressive. It was also stressed very heavily, though, that this 1 week reasonable extension was a soft due date, but that we still should not treat it as like the hard due date. So it was wise to not fall behind and not have to rely on this 1 week period. I was pretty fortunate that throughout the length of this course, I didn't hardly have to rely on it too much. There were a few times here and there, and as the course got later on, closer to winter break, there was about a week or maybe two where I had to rely on it pretty heavily in order to make my different ends meet for my schedules. But luckily, I was able to work within it for most of the course. But the rest of the assignment for this day was learning kind of just more basic procedural stuff. So things like how to access the course website, which was pretty handy. It's got a whole list of the different units in it and the different assignments and different materials and how to check your grades and things like that. And then learning how to control the size of the display. I usually did most of my work on a laptop, so I had a pretty comfortable display. And then also learning things like how to use the course from a mobile device, how to upload a photo for like different kind of posts that we'd be making for our assignments, and then also making sure to set on notifications to go off when different people make comments on our posts so that we know what kind of grading is happening and what to be looking out for in terms of reflecting on our projects and our assignments. There was also more learning about how to refresh a web page and then how to make a unique screen name as well, which was important to do because they were asking for it later in an assignment. Importantly, though, we did go on to learn how to make discussion board posts for this course. And this was a very big deal because discussion board posts were how we would be kind of fulfilling our assignments for the majority of the course. Usually it would be a matter of typing in an amount of text, about 200 words, to kind of answer a question or demonstrate that what we had learned for that unit. But learning how to make these discussion board posts early on was important. We learned a lot about how to make sure we meet that 200 word limit, how to delete extra blank lines, and just like formatting correctly and making sure that paragraphs are about 3 sentences long. And then we also just learned the importance of making sure that these discussion board posts are actually going up and that we're not forgetting to put them up and things like that. We also learned the importance of checking these discussion board posts before we post them because there's not a chance to edit or delete them. And if we make any mistakes, even if we catch them beforehand, those mistakes are still going to be reflected in the grade that we receive for the assignment. So we made sure to learn how important it was to review these posts before they go up and just take a look at them and make sure that we have everything the way we like them and the way that they're supposed to be set up for this course before we actually posted them. And then for actually making the posts, we learned how to embed URLs for different like YouTube videos and just different websites too. Going off of making posts about videos, we also learned how to access the transcripts of YouTube videos and how to adjust the speeds of videos so that they could be played back more easily. We also came up with unique internet backup plans. Because this course is so heavily based on using the internet, obviously it's important to make sure that you have access to it. I'm fortunate enough that in my own apartment we have pretty secure internet, but there have been a couple times where it's been spotty. So definitely having a backup plan was a smart idea because it was good to have a place to go to in the event that like internet wasn't working or maybe I needed just a second space for any reason. So that was smart too. That was good to do. After all this, though, it was finally time to make our first ever discussion board post for this class. And this first one was not too crazy. It was about sharing a basic set of information. So we talked about our preferred first name. Mine is Brett, I said, and then it wanted our unique screen names. Mine that I usually use is just kind of a combination of my first and last name. I go by B. Spielbauer. It's pretty basic, but that's kind of just how I like it. I don't prefer to do anything too crazy usually with internet stuff like names because otherwise I tend to forget them. And then fourth, they had us share which specific hours of the week that we were planning on working on this class. And I said that from Sunday to Friday, I could work on this class from 7 to 9. As the course went on, I usually just kind of worked on different assignments whenever it was convenient for me, but this was definitely a time that I made sure to keep open so that I could work if I ever felt like I needed that time. And I usually did, so that was good. But yeah, these hours were good because they were pretty readily available. I mean, I'm not usually too busy at 7 p.m. at night, so that's just a good time to get some work for class done. And then, like I said earlier, my internet backup plan. I usually will just make a trip to a nearby library if I ever need to use a different source of internet. The business library is very close to me, so that's the one that I would end up going to the most. And that was always really convenient to be able to go there. And then after that, we worked to embed a post of one of our favorite YouTube videos. I decided to embed the YouTube video for, it's a music video actually from the band Weezer. I'm not a huge fan of theirs. I like some of their stuff, but this song in particular in the corresponding video I really like. but the song is Island in the Sun. And I think there's actually multiple different videos for it, but the one that I like is the one that has the most animals in it. I think they shot it in Africa, but basically they're just listening to the song and they're dancing around, and there's just a bunch of cute animals, and I like the video. But yeah, I like that video. It's just very comforting for me, and I usually listen to it sometimes if I'm feeling kind of bummed, just because it's cute and it's fun and it makes me happy. And then the website that I decided to share is called Bandle. It's kind of similar to Wordle a little bit. It's a daily game you can play where the people who make the site, they pick like a song for the day, and then you're trying to guess the song, but they only give you different parts of the song at a time. So you might start with like the drum line, and then if you can try and guess it based off that, but if you get it wrong, then they'll give you like the bass line, or they might give you like the guitars, or they might give you the vocals later on, and you're just trying to guess what this song is basically. I'm kind of a music fan, so stuff like that is just sort of fun for me. It's just kind of fun to be able to like recognize stuff and be able to pick it apart and see the different like working pieces that go into it. I don't make any music, but kind of getting to see it all pulled apart like that is fun. I just enjoy it. Yeah, but after I typed up all that information into my discussion board post and posted it, I was officially done. That was my first post, and it was pretty cool to get done. I enjoyed it honestly, and getting to look around at some of the other stuff that my classmates did was kind of cool too, because you could see the different embeds for the videos on the websites and whatnot, where they talked about what they liked and what kind of was fun for them, and that was really interesting. But then finally, for this course, I took a look at the syllabus and read the section that explained how you're supposed to find out which section you're actually in. So basically, you just use any of the links from the master site for the course to go to a discussion board post, and then up in the top section of the screen, you can see a little slice where it mentions just what unit you're in, what assignment you're on, and then also what group you're in. But after reading that, I went back to the discussion board post. Checked the top, and I could see that I was in the group called the hashtags. So that was pretty cool. But that was all we did for that day. Assignment number 2, unit 1. So that was pretty fun, and I was looking forward to moving on to the next one. Moving on to unit 3, it was time to watch our first lecture video for the course. And I've never actually had an online course before, so just starting off the bat, I was surprised to see that the entire video was less than 16 minutes long. Most lectures will run for a week's worth of content. It's about, I want to say, 150 minutes, so a little more than 2 hours. But yeah, seeing like a lecture video that was below 16 was crazy. And the amount of information that's presented is also really good too. There's no real downtime throughout the video, and there's constant sharing and imagery to look at, and just a bunch of different things being shared. So that was really cool to see that the different lectures were kind of broken down to a very convenient and efficient pace like that. This lecture was interesting because it talked about the different merits of teaching online. It opens up with a section where the Professor Gernsbacher, talks about some of the different reactions that she's had over time to telling people that she teaches online. And she talks about a lot of the kind of skepticism or doubt, I guess you could say, that people respond with. And to be completely honest, that's a little bit how I felt too about this course going in. I've never taken an online course before, but I've kind of heard less than stellar things about them, so I wasn't exactly sure what to think going into this. But she does a really good job of kind of dispelling the different sort of negatives of teaching online. She does this kind of fun fake out actually, where she shares a lot of different kind of quotes and little factoids about the internet and how people use it and different technologies like Snapchat and fantasy football. But then later on, she actually reveals that these kinds of sayings or negative thoughts about these different technologies were actually not related to them at all, but she reworded the quotes, and that originally they were about things like listening to music or reading magazines or newspapers. And she does this to kind of highlight the fact that um, there is kind of a stigma around new technologies a lot of the time. There's a lot of fear that surrounds them, but this fear has always been there, and it's not necessarily new for the internet. And, whatever comes after us, it will also have this fear attached to it. And, I mean, we can be afraid of these things, but still realize, too, that a lot of that fear is kind of unfounded. Like, we still have music, recorded music, the written word today. We still have, like, newspapers and magazines today, and this whole lecture just did a good job of highlighting that just because we think the internet is bad doesn't necessarily mean that it is, and just because it's new doesn't mean that we have to be fearful of it, because these older things that people were once fearful of ended up really not being as threatening as we thought they were. So really it's just a matter of kind of having a greater amount of perspective and realizing that it's easy to be afraid of these things, but ultimately there's not that much to be afraid of if we know kind of what we're working with and we can realistically think about it and consider how it fits into daily living. But yes, the professor kind of talks about how there's no reason to really believe that technology, the modern technology that we have, is going to like kind of demoralize people or ruin character, or it's going to waste everyone's time more than the technologies of the past did. And she does a very good job of exploring this idea in this lecture, because she talks about how, like I said earlier, we thought old technologies would do this and they really didn't. Not that much changes. At the end of the lecture, she talks about how, with time, these different technologies have become sort of settled and people have found them to be reliable. Like, people don't have a problem with air conditioning or the automobile anymore. They're not as fearful of these things as they once were. And then she kind of uses this idea to explain that even though online courses are kind of stigmatized a bit in this day and age, they're generally seen as less effective. She believes that if she kind of keeps at it and keeps teaching in this methodology, then eventually there will be a day when these classes will be accepted and seen as legitimate, which I think makes a lot of sense following the logic that she uses. The idea that given enough time and given enough resources and effort, that we can kind of normalize these different tools, and that, maybe they're frowned upon today, but if we really believe in them and see them for the effective tools that they are, and we just work with them, that eventually other people will come to realize that they are effective tools, and then we can just kind of collaborate and use all these tools together. After this lecture, we were assigned with reading a set of articles and watching a set of videos that all talked about past technologies that people feared. And these all came about before the internet. They're no longer feared. But basically, as we were reading these different articles, we had to find 10 examples of past technologies that existed that people did not like, but that have now kind of settled into the collective conscious as acceptable and normalized. We read an article by Clive Thompson called Why Chess Will Destroy Your Mind. We also read an article by Pete Etchells called Let's Ditch the Tired Tropes About Video Games. And then we read Barbara Ortete's article, Before Parental Screen Time Concerns, Radio, Even Novels. We read another article by Clive Thompson called The Digital Age is Making Us Smarter and the Kids Are Still Alright. We watched a college humor video by Adam Conover titled Why the Internet is Good for Society. And then finally, we read an article by Jason Pfeiffer called Why Do We Keep Panicking Over Tech? After taking down 10 different and unique technologies that had been present throughout these different readings and videos, I decided to make my unique post about a technology that no one had written about yet, about the popularization of the radio over time. Because back when it first came out, there were a lot of people who felt that what was being broadcasted wasn't necessarily as censored as it should be, and that it was like too addicting for a lot of people. Nowadays, radio, I would say, is actually kind of a dying medium. It was super popular back when I was young, but nowadays it feels like people stream everything. But there was certainly a time when it was very, very popular, probably the most popular medium for just listening to music. If you think about what people did in their cars or in their garages as they worked, just because it was an easy way to kind of tap into large sources of media without having to necessarily spend too much money. The idea of regulation is actually pretty interesting in relation to the internet today, because this idea that the internet is too unregulated is still kind of something that a lot of people believe. And there's an argument that could be made there, but I mean, this definitely relates back to radio as well, because if you think about, it's a few people sitting in a booth talking into a microphone, and then that information being broadcasted very widely, almost regardless of what's actually being said. If you think about just normal conversations that a person might have, they're probably going to offend you could probably offend any given group if you're talking about any kind of politics or information or sharing opinions about songs or whatever you're really discussing. It makes sense that there would be people listening who feel like they're hearing things necessarily that they don't want to hear. But yeah, I mean, as we've seen, this kind of fear around the radio has definitely dried up, and now people are more accepting of it, and they see it as just kind of a basic form of communication that we honestly take for granted at this point. There's not many people who talk about the radio or listen to it nearly as much as we used to in the past. But anyways, once I was done with all the readings and I had talked about my technology in my discussion post, I made sure to upload it. And then that was the end of Unit 1, Assignment 3. I was officially done with my third day. Assignment number 4 was an interesting one because it was the first time where we were actually required to go back and find different posts that had been made by classmates and the professor and the TAs for Unit 1, Assignment number 2. But this time it was a chance for us to kind of go back and read about the other people around us and sort of figure out what different things they like. So this is looking back at the assignment where we sort of talked about our names, our screen names, and then made sure to post a video on a website that we liked. So it was kind of a fun thing to look at because it was very personal and it had a lot of content that people kind of maybe held close to them or did a good job of showing like different things that kind of, I guess, almost hobbies you could say in a way, similarly, just sort of different things that people enjoy. I started off by reading the professor's post, though, Professor Gernsbacher. She talked about her preferred name. She preferred to be called Professor Gernsbacher. And then her screen name, too, which she shared, Prof G55. And then she explained the name, too, kind of talking about how Prof is because of her standing as a professor. And then the G part being a play on words for her last name initial and the notion of gee whiz. And then the 55 representing her birth year as well. She also talked about the days of the week that she'd study on and just sort of, well, that was actually common in every post. They all had those 2 hours a week that they'd be sharing. And then they also all talked about their internet backup plans. But more interestingly, the professor talked about one of her favorite websites, which is called Information is Beautiful. That's a website that portrays a lot of different kinds of data. And then she gives the example of it sharing information about dog breeds, olive oils, and then the spreading of coronavirus as well, which is actually very interesting. I'd never heard of this website before, but having all that information kind of tied into one space is pretty cool. And then she also shared a favorite YouTube video of hers, which was from 1994. It's a clip from the NBC TV show, The Today Show. And then it actually has a UW-Madison commencement speaker who was at Madison a few years ago. And basically the people on the show are talking about the internet and kind of what it is and what it does, and they're exploring it, which is interesting because we think about, the internet as we know it today. And just, I guess, the idea of the average American person being unfamiliar with the internet is interesting to think about because it's so far removed from our own lives where we use it all the time, every day, for everything, it feels like. But then following that, I read the posts from the different TAs, Abby Kilty, Candace Malone, and then Stephanie Ward. They also shared an interesting kind of skew of websites and videos. Some were music videos, some were relaxation based, and then there were also websites about like different news sites and academic scholar sites, which were fun to read about. I enjoyed checking them out. It was interesting to kind of learn about the TAs by viewing content that they enjoy rather than just hearing from them about maybe things that they like, but actually getting to engage with the content and look at it more closely. Finally, for this assignment, we also had to find posts that were made by 3 different classmates of ours and then respond to them with a 200-word statement. And then I also made sure to look at the course syllabus to learn about the best way to make a response to a student's post. And I learned that each response has to contain at least 2 of the following: either a compliment, a comment, a connection, or a question. And this was pretty standard for all of the different responses that we had to make throughout the course of this class. But basically the idea was that we could compliment, saying that we liked something that a post said. We could comment just by saying, like, kind of reflecting on what was said in the post, so maybe talking about what we agree or disagree with. We could make a connection where we talk about what we read in the post and we kind of relate it back to something that maybe we heard somewhere else, or then just asking a question, kind of more just like on a hypothetical level where we talk about maybe, oh, I wonder why, you found this kind of piece of information that you found, or I wonder maybe how this would have happened if maybe this had been different instead. Just kind of leaving it more open in that sense. But anyhow, I first commented on a post made by a classmate of mine called Nicole. She talked about, again, her name, her screen name, and then the time of class or the time of day that she'd prefer to work on the class for. And then she uploaded a video about yoga, which is interesting. I don't do yoga too much, but in the past I've tried it a few times. So that was pretty cool to see because I got a chance to kind of talk about how I could connect that to my own life. And then she also shared a website that has a lot of different clothing brands, or actually her favorite clothing brand, she says. So that was pretty cool too. Felt unique, and I guess an easy way to kind of imagine like a person's sort of set of activities that they like to go through, or kind of having an idea of their clothing style is an interesting way to think about them in a more like kind of third person sense. Next up, I found a post by a classmate of mine named Kayang. She shared an interesting YouTube video. She said it's just something that she kind of plays in the background to study to. It's a nice relaxation video that she uses, which I could totally relate to. A lot of times when I'm studying or working, I like to have some kind of sort of white sound to kind of just let my brain relax to. And then she also shared the New York Times Wordle, which I think we're all pretty familiar with. It's the game where you have the 5-letter word and you have the 6 sort of attempts to figure it out. But that was pretty cool to see something too that I recognized, because up until now, all the content I'd seen had been pretty new. So it was fun to be able to see something that I could connect to because I kind of recognized it. And then finally, I found a post by a classmate named Sydney. She shared a video from the famous television show Dancing with the Stars. This was actually a show that my mother used to watch a lot when I was younger, so I recognize it a little bit. And I've just seen it around generally because it is pretty popular. But she talks about how the dance in the particular video that she shared is one of her favorites on the show, and that she's looking forward to the new season that at the time of this post was being made in a couple of weeks. So that was pretty cool. And then she also shared website as her favorite website because she talks about how she enjoys watching TV shows and movies on there, which I could definitely relate to. I've been on Netflix quite a few times in my own life, watching a lot of shows and movies. That's usually my number one go-to spot, especially for movies, just because sometimes they have a good rotation that goes through there. So I definitely know what she's talking about when she says movies and shows and whatnot. So that was kind of fun to relate to as well. But anyhow, this was my first time getting a chance to respond to different discussion board posts, and I could kind of understand the format of how it was going, sort of the whole idea of commenting and connecting and whatnot. So figuring that out was a little interesting at first, kind of having like a set of rules for it, but figuring out then wasn't too bad either. Moving on to Unit 1, Assignment 5, we had a series of readings to go through that all discussed different skills that employers like to look for in new employees. We also did a little bit of reading that explained how online learning can help to foster these skills in a way that physical, kind of in-person learning might not do as well. We were then asked to identify 3 of the skills that were mentioned in Ward's 2017 article or Copeland's 2012 book, or from the summary of the 2012 book, that we wanted to develop further. And going off of this, I said that I wanted to further develop my interpersonal, teamwork, and analytical skills. The reason I would say this is because I think I work really well independently. I have an easy time kind of understanding work and meeting deadlines. But sometimes I have a bad tendency of not always considering other people's skill sets or their strengths and their weaknesses, and sometimes this makes me kind of, I would say, not the best team member that I could be. So I think that's definitely something I could work on. And then analytical skills are always a good thing. I feel like when I think of analytical skills, I imagine that it kind of requires more insight at knowing sort of your platform and your audience, or maybe like what kind of the end destination is for this data that you're analyzing in the first place. And I think that when you move to new fields or try new things, you're always going to have to kind of redevelop your knowledge base, which means that having analytical skills is going to be really important because that's what you're using to sort of build yourself up and make yourself kind of useful in these scenarios. Next, after this, we had a series of infographics that we read that explained different ways, or I guess that name different skills that would be considered 21st century skills, or things that people just living in this area would be expected to kind of know and be proficient in, to be, I guess, ideal within the workplace. These skills, we've probably all heard somewhat kind of around before, but it includes things like digital fluency, being able to read like in a versatile sense. So, like learning about the world with challenging fiction and nonfiction texts, being critical thinkers. There's a lot of misinformation that goes around with the internet because it's easier to make and easier to spread. So, being able to kind of think in a more intense manner about what we're seeing and being able to consider whether or not it's believable is important. But then also things like just general problem solving and reflective thinking, kind of being able to look back upon what you did and sort of being able to reflect upon it all. We were then shown a 21st century skills assessment document, and we were tasked with assessing ourselves. And a lot of this document was about kind of the ability to apply technology effectively, analyzing media, evaluating like the usefulness and the meaning of information, and then like time management and just sort of a bunch of kind of independent abilities like that. Being able to consider the different content that we're interacting with and making sure that it's, believable and that it's original, and just sort of thinking about how to apply it in like nuanced senses rather than just sort of weakly reflecting upon it. After going through the second batch of articles, we were told to find another set of skills that we wanted to focus on more in the future. And the skills from this part that I chose to focus on were reflective thinking, creative communication, and information management. I believe personally that being able to truly understand the materials that we interact with is imperative, and that being able to kind of clearly communicate your material and other people's material around is important, just because that way everyone is on the same page and it's easier to discuss things and work through things when everyone has a shared idea of what they mean and their importance. And at the same time, having good material doesn't mean much if we can't actually explain it, or like kind of liken it to what other people have said, or explain what makes it special. Even if we have something that's powerful, it doesn't mean much if no one else believes that it is. Next, for this assignment, we went on to learn more about why certain aspects of this course are structured the way they are. And this was kind of interesting, I thought, because I haven't had a class where they really kind of looked at like a meta level of why the class was laid out the way it was. But in this course, and this was pretty interesting, but they talked about how because we use internet-based technology, and like we learn through a lot of different like websites and videos and images and stuff. Um, but basically they emphasized kind of going back to what skills are marketable in the job economy. They talked about how like having detailed understandings of computers and like being able to use written communication well and like mastering social media are all things that many different employers consider to be very important in the job market. And these are all skills that we develop in this course where we work online, because a lot of it is about written communication especially, and just having kind of the ability to use online technology to complete different tasks and submit assignments and whatnot. There was a second reading that also talked about why it's important that this course emphasizes the importance of like following instructions and meeting deadlines, because these again are also things that are very important in the job market. And there was actually a brief from the Michigan State University that was uploaded to the course site, and highlighted on this brief, that's explained that two of the major reasons for kind of discipline towards new employees is failure to follow instructions and the missing assignments and deadlines. And these are both things that are heavily emphasized in this course, teaching those skills like following instructions and meeting deadlines, which is obviously very helpful as someone who will be moving into the workforce one day, being able to work on these skills and kind of develop them before it's like too late necessarily is super important, and I appreciate that. There was another reading that also talked about why setting a series of short, kind of limited deadlines was a lot better for preventing procrastination or helping students out than setting like these kind of far off in the distance deadlines, because it helps students to kind of stay on track and work through their things rather than putting them off and trying to grind them all out at the very end. And it's also described how these sort of shorter deadlines help students with maybe mental health issues, or like just a general difficulty in kind of, uh, I guess, affording attention to a task rather than kind of like getting distracted. This is a way for them to work on different little parts so that they have hopefully an easier time kind of putting it all together. This is also kind of a lot more comparable to the market, like the job market, because generally in your career, it's going to be a matter of like meeting deadlines and making presentations. And obviously, every job is different. There are no two that are exactly the same, but it's a lot more common to have a series of kind of small projects that need to be done in order to sort of kind of make your job requirements rather than like these far off things that kind of happen at like small points throughout the year that you're constantly just working away at. So this is another good way to kind of prepare for the job market. Next, we read about the importance of the deadline and how it gets used in this class. We actually read an interesting little 3-page paper that talked about how deadlines kind of help people see goals as like kind of concrete things that need to get done rather than almost like suggestions. And it talks about how they sent out these emails to people, and one of the emails had, or they both had tasks, I should say, but one of these emails put a deadline on that task and the other email did not. And what they saw with the email that had a deadline attached to it was that 24% of people who received the email actually completed the application, 24 more percent than the other group. And this is kind of an interesting way of thinking about how, like, even though maybe we're making things more difficult, it kind of taps into the psychology of, like, kind of completing tasks and getting things done that need to get done, and then sort of motivation. I think it taps a lot into motivation and kind of twist people into, I guess, wanting to get things done, maybe, just out of a feeling of necessity. But I think all these things about how our course uses written communication and how we use different deadlines and like short deadlines, and like how we kind of don't negotiate them past the point of you do get that 1 week kind of like that 1 week that's free almost where you can let it go, but you're expected to make that up. Things like that I think all work very well in this course together, just because they sort of set students up for success because they rely on these different skills that we learn about in these readings. I know that when I initially worked through this assignment, I made sure to talk about how I was definitely going to be taking advantage of these different sort of kind of bits of methodology for this class. I'm someone who likes shorter kind of rapid deadlines rather than having the opportunity to push things off, because sometimes when I do have that opportunity, I kind of overutilize it. So I know that having a bunch of things to do kind of in a smaller amount of time was nice for me personally. I appreciated that, and I definitely took advantage of it. Next, after this, for part D, I just did a little bit of review for the assignment. So first I reviewed the course syllabus, the section that talked about how to do well in this course. And then there was a handout to read as well that talked about why and how like paying attention in this course was going to be helpful for just kind of everything generally. And then afterwards, I went on to identify 3 different strategies that were mentioned in one of the two. And then kind of talking about how I was going to use them in this course. But basically, I talked about how I definitely wanted to work on this course multiple times throughout the week. I didn't want to do any kind of like piling up of anything and then like trying to, I guess, like let it sit. I wanted to try and work ahead, and then like when I had the time, realistically, because sometimes working ahead is not always doable. You know, it's ideal, but sometimes you just don't have the time. But there were times when I was able to do it, and it was really nice because it kind of gave me a chance to, I guess, put more effort into the things that I was doing when I had more time, because I felt like less stressed about what I had coming up. And then I also knew that I wanted to try and focus deeply on the instructions that were being given to me, just because I think that's important in all courses and all things. You know, we kind of use our different instructions to get any kind of work done, even if it's like outside of your job necessarily. So that was definitely something that I knew I wanted to focus on. But just like kind of being able to smartly manage my workload by working around it was for sure like a good thing, you know, like just kind of a good thing to be refreshed about, and that was good to keep in my mind. After this, I went and found my friend AD, and I told them about the 3 different things that I took down from parts A, B, C, and D. and just kind of explain them to them and talk them through the different processes and why like I thought they would be important for this class and just generally like life beyond that. And we had a nice discussion about it. It was kind of cool because I know they kind of mentioned a lot of things that kind of also kind of mirrored how I felt. Like just how generally like they felt these skills were important too, but sometimes it's easy to almost forget about them when we're working just because we try to do them all the time and sometimes it's just hard to keep up with that. But yeah, we had a nice little discussion about these different skills and kind of abilities that were mentioned in this course, and having a way to sort of put a name to them was nice too. I also knew that this person was going to be like good to kind of talk to about this kind of stuff because I know that they have courses where they definitely talk about these kind of skill sets too, and they like have different kind of ideas of what it means to be successful, and just kind of I know they like to work ahead on their projects. They don't like to let stuff sit. They don't like to sort of put things off. They kind of are more responsible with how they handle work, so I knew they'd be good to talk about. But then finally, after all that, I put all the different kind of little parts that I talked about from parts A, B, C, and D, and then my information about who I talked to. I put that all into my discussion post where I shared my 3 different bits from every part of like the different skills generally that I wanted to focus on. I put them all into my discussion post and I talked about all of them and explained how they applied to me in the class. And then finally, once that was all done, I felt confident enough to submit it. The 6th and final assignment for this week started off pretty interestingly. We started off by reading a couple articles about ChatGPT and just how it's grown in recent times and sort of why it's become super popular and why it's also become kind of problematic in a sense. We read about how it's important that you don't trust everything that you get from it because sometimes we see it create like inaccurate or misleading information. And then we also get answers that a lot of times are kind of reasoned to sound probable, like just the way that the AI will read it back to you. It feels like it makes sense, but if you actually look at like the sources, they don't necessarily reflect what is being shared with you. As someone with sort of like a pre-law kind of background, a lot of times examples that I hear are examples of AIs that will actually cite like different legal cases or legal sort of things that have happened in the courtrooms as like kind of setting precedent or just general like kind of legal scholarship. And actually, a lot of times these different cases that they cite are not real. They never happened. And that's been very problematic in a few instances. Some lawyers have actually gotten in quite a bit of trouble for bringing different like made up cases to court because they didn't like check their sources or anything beforehand. So I know firsthand that this whole deal of AI kind of making up information can be very problematic because it can get people in all different kinds of trouble. There was also an interesting collection of kind of different tweets that we read for this assignment where they talk about like kind of different issues that AI has had with like basic math and like different things it's done creating like song lyrics. And like I think one interesting example that they showed was it listed 13 fortune cookies that would completely devastate a duck, and then it gives a bunch of fun examples about like how they're gonna eat like bad bread or run into like bugs or something, like just kind of showing it off and just kind of being cute with it. And I thought this was fun because it also had a collection of like reactions to it from the general public. And I mean, I can remember when I first kind of started using AI. That was only like a couple or a few years ago, and I feel like I felt much of the same way. Like just kind of realizing the scope of it all and like how much information it could like process and like spit back at you, and how like creatively it could think was just like super crazy to see at the time. And seeing how these people are kind of reacting to it is just it kind of takes me back, and it's totally relatable because I mean it really is unlike any of the tools that we've seen like kind of grow up in I guess recent time or in my own lifetime, I would say. Finally, then going after this assignment started to focus more on the side of kind of using critical thinking around AI and sort of trying to be more aware of what information we're getting from it and how that information could be biased or incorrect in a sense. We talked about sort of moral panics in the history of that. We talked about concerns about kids using screens too much in the modern day. Um, But then just kind of getting an idea of how like people generally react to new technologies and whether or not these reactions are very well founded or not. And what we've seen is that historically they're usually not. We're usually kind of afraid of new technologies just because they are new. Um, Even though maybe there's not a whole lot to actually be afraid of, and we'd be better off trying to think of how to incorporate these technologies and kind of work with them in a way that is productive and realistic and useful. Next, then, we had a set of 5 questions that we were expected to feed to ChatGPT. These were kind of questions about like just general bits of information, or they started off more general, I should say, and then as they went on, they got more specific. Um, but basically, they were a lot of times about asking about what kind of colors the chairs were on the Memorial Terrace, or how to find like citations for different articles that the professor has uploaded. And expectedly, what we saw was that the more kind of general, well known information ChatGPT could pull up pretty well, but the more obscure the questions got or detailed, or like the more kind of contingencies there were in the questions, the less sort of well the AI performed when it was able to pick out the information and respond to our prompt. Next, we did a little test where we took our response to the Unit 1 Assignment 3 post and we posted it into a ChatGPT detector box. And then we had to take a little partial screenshot of the output from this detector. And then we just put that response into our assignment for this unit. So for the Unit 1, Assignment 6, along with our responses to the different kind of things about what we read for this unit and all that. We were also given a prompt, or a response, I should say, that ChatGPT created at one point for Unit 3, or Unit 1 Assignment 3, And then we were told to put this through the ChatGPT detector as well and see what response it gave. And what we saw is that the detector was actually really able to actually determine whether or not ChatGPT was used in the prompts at all. Because for my first response, I didn't use it. And the detector didn't detect any kind of like use of AI. But then in this one that we were given that was created by AI, the detector had a very easy time determining that there was AI that was used, and it kind of flagged a bunch of different little parts of it. After that, we learned about how AI could be used in this course, but there was kind of a set of rules we had to follow about being clear where we used it and how we used it. I personally don't use it to complete my assignments, so I didn't really worry about this too much because I know that I wasn't going to use it, and I never really did, so I didn't have to worry about this too much, fortunately. But it was interesting to see that we were given the option, because I know a lot of classes will ban it outright, or they'll just kind of have unrestricted access to it. But I think the way that this class handled it, where we use it in a certain way and then we very clearly define how we use it, was interesting. I don't think I've really seen that in a course before, but I thought it was cool how it kind of gave us a chance to reflect on how we're using it and what it means and why it is like as important and powerful as it is. Next up, we learned how to do our work with the course review sheets, and these were going to be a pretty big kind of reoccurring theme. We typically do them every Sunday for this course. Every unit, there's another set of different bits of information that we're expected to type into the document, along with all the information that we've learned from the previous week. But for this week, our assignment was to fill in a 3x3 grid with the names of 9 different technologies or pastimes that were mentioned in the lecture video from the professor earlier in the week, Adam Conover's video, Clive Thompson's articles, or Jason Pfeiffer's article. And then these different like technologies or pastimes, they have to have preceded the internet. They must not currently be feared, but they must have previously been feared. And they have to have previously been feared in a way that was similar to how the internet is kind of feared in a sense today by some people. And then the technologies that I put down were reading the newspaper, playing chess, women riding bicycles, listening to the radio, listening to the phonograph, women reading fictional books, watching television, the written word itself, and then the Sony Walkman. Those were just the little bits. I think most of them I picked up were from the lecture video, but yeah, they were just kind of sprinkled out as we took the class. So then after that, I saved that file to my computer, and I uploaded it for this week's Unit 1 Assignment 6 assignment. And then I also made sure to upload my text document where I was talking about the different kind of ChatGPT activities. So like the stuff about the detector and how well it could pick stuff up like that. And then like how well ChatGPT could actually respond to different prompts. But after that, I just uploaded those 2 files, and then that was it. I was officially done with my first week of the class, and honestly, I felt like I was kind of getting into a groove right off the bat. It kind of was satisfying, I think, how a lot of the material was laid out in a very step by step basis, and how kind of on certain days of the week we almost do like sort of repeating tasks, like how on Sundays we kind of have our different course review assignments. So that was pretty cool, and I was happy to see how it all was laid out, and I was honestly looking forward to moving forward with the class. But that was all for week 1. Moving on to week 2, I guess.